The ultrasound gel was cold. Not the kind of cold you forget, the kind that makes your skin contract, makes you aware of every nerve ending. Dr. Lowen had warmed it in her hands first, the way good OBGYNs do, but it still felt like ice spreading across my 20-week belly. The room smelled like medical-grade lavender and the faint metallic tang of sterilized equipment. I was staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the small perforations in the acoustic panels, when I heard it. The transducer hit the floor. Not a gentle slip. A drop. The gel-slicked wand bounced once against the linoleum with a wet, rubbery thud that echoed in the small examination room. Dr. Lowen didn't reach for it. She didn't apologize. She didn't move. Her eyes were locked on the screen, her face drained of color like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood out. "Maya," she whispered, and her voice had edges I'd never heard in a doctor's tone before. Sharp. Jagged. Afraid. "Who chose your OBGYN for your previous appointments?" My husband's Patek Philippe watch ticked in the hallway outside. I could hear it through the door. Julian was out there, probably checking his emails, annoyed that a routine anatomy scan was cutting into his quarterly earnings call. The fetal heartbeat monitor filled the silence between us with its rhythmic thump-thump-thump, a sound that should have been comforting but suddenly felt like a countdown. "My husband did," I said slowly. "Dr. Eris Thorne. He's Julian's family physician. He's been managing my care since we started trying 3 years ago." Dr. Lowen's jaw tightened. She reached for her tablet, her fingers moving fast across the screen, pulling up something from the state medical database. Her breath was short. Controlled. The kind of breathing you do when you're trying not to scream. "I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, leaning in so close I could smell the coffee on her breath. "I'm looking at your medical records from Dr. Thorne's office right now. Records that were filed with the state. And I'm looking at this ultrasound. Maya, you aren't just pregnant. You're a biological impossibility." The acoustic tiles above me blurred. My hands, resting on the small swell of my stomach, began to tremble. The baby kicked once, twice, like it could sense the seismic shift happening in the room. "What are you talking about?" My voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. She turned the tablet toward me. There were surgical notes. Dates. Billing codes. The words swam in front of my eyes, but 3 phrases locked into focus like a sniper scope zeroing in on a target. Bilateral tubal ligation. Patient consent. Waived per spousal authorization. Procedure completed during exploratory laparoscopy. April 2021. "You were sterilized, Maya," Dr. Lowen said, and each word landed like a scalpel between my ribs. 3 years ago. Without your knowledge. The appendectomy you think you had? It wasn't an appendectomy. It was a permanent surgical sterilization performed by Dr. Thorne at your husband's request. The baby kicked again. Harder this time. A tiny fist or foot pressing against the inside of my abdomen, as if to say, asterisk, I'm here. I'm real. How is this possible? Asterisk. And that's when I heard Julian's voice through the door, smooth and impatient. "Maya, how much longer? I have the Sanderson call in 10 minutes. For the first time in 8 years of marriage, I realized the man standing outside that door wasn't the father of my child. He was the architect of my cage. Before I tell you how I got pregnant with a child that should have been medically impossible, you need to understand the Julian Mercer ecosystem. That's what I called it in my head during year 5, when I still had enough of myself left to be sarcastic. An ecosystem. A carefully balanced environment where every variable was controlled, every outcome predicted, every living thing inside it dependent on the architect for survival. I met Julian when I was 22. I was finishing my master's in biomedical engineering at Stanford, 3 months away from a research position at a gene therapy startup that was doing groundbreaking work in CRISPR applications. I had a future. I had a brain that people respected. I had a scholarship, a beat-up Honda Civic, and a 1-bedroom apartment in Palo Alto that smelled like ramen and ambition. Julian was 30. He walked into the university's donor gala like he owned the building, which, technically, his venture capital firm had partially funded. He wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my annual stipend, and he smelled like sandalwood and old money confidence. Not cologne. Something deeper. The scent of a man who had never once in his life wondered if he deserved to be in a room. He didn't just flirt with me. He studied me. He asked about my research with a kind of focused attention that made me feel like I was the only person in a room of 200. He remembered the details. 3 weeks later, he sent a handwritten note to my lab with a first edition copy of The Double Helix, and a reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant I'd only read about in magazines. 6 months later, he proposed on a yacht in the bay. The ring was a flawless 3-carat diamond that caught the light like a warning I didn't know how to read. "I want to build something with you, Maya," he said, holding my hands while the sun set behind him like a movie backdrop. "But I need you to trust me. I need you to let me be the provider. Your job is too stressful. The lab hours, the grant pressure. It's going to burn you out before you're 30. Let me take care of you. Let me give you the life you deserve." It sounded like love. It tasted like champagne and security, and the promise that I would never again have to choose between paying rent and buying textbooks. So I said yes. I turned down the research position. I let Julian streamline my career into something more sustainable. Freelance consulting that slowly, imperceptibly, became nothing at all. By year 2, my official title was wife. My unofficial title was Chief Operating Officer of Julian's Ego. I managed 3 properties: the main house in Atherton, the ski cabin in Tahoe, the beach rental in Carmel. I hosted charity galas where Julian was praised for his visionary philanthropy, while I smiled in dresses he'd chosen and made sure the catering staff knew he preferred his salmon precisely medium rare. I woke up at 5:45 every morning to blend his protein shake. Organic pea protein, almond milk, exactly 1 tablespoon of almond butter, 42 degrees Fahrenheit, no ice crystals, because anything else made him feel off for his morning run. I stopped publishing research. I stopped answering emails from former colleagues. I stopped having opinions about anything that mattered. By year 5, I had 3 walk-in closets full of designer clothes, a personal trainer, and a calendar that was completely empty except for Julian's needs. By year 7, I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me what I thought about anything other than whether the caterer should serve beef or chicken. And then came the infertility. Or what I was told was infertility. We started trying for a baby in year 5. Julian announced it the way he announced all major life decisions. Over breakfast, with his iPad open to a color-coded spreadsheet he'd built to track my ovulation cycles, basal body temperature, and optimal fertilization windows. "I've done the research," he said, scrolling through charts that looked like quarterly earnings reports. "We'll start with natural methods for 6 months. If that doesn't work, we'll escalate to IVF with Dr. Thorne. He's the best reproductive endocrinologist in the state. Handles all the top families. Very discreet." I nodded. I was good at nodding by then. Month 1. Negative. Month 6. Negative. Month 12. Negative. By month 18, Julian's tone had shifted. The "we" became "you." The problem had a location now, a source code error, and it was inside my body. "Your stress levels are too high, Maya," he'd say, rubbing my shoulder with the kind of mechanical sympathy you'd give a malfunctioning appliance. "Dr. Thorne says your cortisol levels are inhibiting implantation. You're too tense. Too in your head. This is why I didn't want you working. You can't regulate your nervous system." Dr. Eris Thorne's clinic didn't look like a medical office. It looked like a luxury hotel lobby. Marble floors, leather chairs, a receptionist who spoke in hushed, reverent tones like we were in a temple instead of a fertility center. Thorne himself was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, with a kind of calm, paternalistic smile that made you feel like a child who didn't understand the adult conversation happening above your head. "Your FSH levels are elevated," Thorne explained during our 3rd appointment, gesturing to test results I wasn't allowed to take home. "Your ovarian reserve is lower than we'd like for someone your age. And your uterine lining, well, it's just not receptive. Some women's bodies simply aren't designed for easy conception. It's no one's fault, Maya. It's just biology." I sat there in the examination chair, my feet in the stirrups, while 2 men discussed my defective reproductive system like they were diagnosing a car that kept stalling out. "But we can manage it," Thorne continued, his hand resting on Julian's shoulder like they were teammates. "We'll start hormone therapy. I'll prescribe a specialized supplement regimen. And Maya, you need to reduce your activity level. No more gym. No more long walks. Your body needs to conserve energy for conception." Julian drove me home in his Tesla, one hand on the wheel, the other squeezing my knee. "Hey," he said softly. his voice dripping with a kind of gentle condescension that made my skin crawl even when I didn't know why. "This doesn't change anything. I married you for you, not for your ability to have kids. If your body can't do this, I'll never blame you. I'll never leave you just because you're broken." Broken. The word hung in the car like smoke. I smiled. I thanked him for being so understanding. And I spent the next 2 years believing that my body, my brilliant biomedical engineering degree-holding body, was a defective machine that couldn't perform its most basic biological function. Until 4 months ago, when I took a pregnancy test in a gas station bathroom during a rare solo trip to Target, and saw 2 lines. I stared at that test for 10 minutes in the fluorescent-lit stall, the smell of industrial cleaner burning my nostrils, while a child screamed in the next stall over and someone's phone alarm kept ringing. 2 lines. Positive. A miracle, Julian called it when I told him that night. Dr. Thorne called it unexpected but encouraging. I called it the beginning of the end. Because miracles don't exist in biology. Only variables you haven't identified yet. Julian's reaction to the pregnancy was theatrical. He cried, actual tears streaming down his face, while he held the positive test in his hands like it was a holy relic. He called Dr. Thorne immediately, right there in our bedroom at 11 p.m., pacing across the Carrara marble floor in his bare feet while he demanded an emergency confirmation appointment. "This is it, Maya," he whispered after he hung up, pulling me into an embrace that felt more like being absorbed than held. "This is our miracle. After everything you've been through, your body finally did it. I'm so proud of you." The next morning, he assembled what he called the Pregnancy Protection Plan. It was a 3-ring binder. Color-coded tabs. Laminated pages. Section 1. Medical Protocol. All appointments with Dr. Thorne. No second opinions. No online research, too much anxiety-inducing misinformation. No prenatal classes, we'll hire an expert to come to the house. Section 2. Nutrition and supplements. A daily regimen of 12 different vitamins, all sourced through Thorne's clinic pharmacy. Each pill had a specific time window. Julian would personally hand them to me with filtered water, watching while I swallowed. Section 3. Mobility restrictions. No driving, pregnancy brain makes reaction times dangerous. No solo trips. No long walks. The personal trainer was replaced with a wellness nurse, named Carissa, who moved into our guest suite and monitored my vitals 3 times a day. "I'm just being careful," Julian said when I suggested the binder was excessive. "You're high risk, Maya. Thorne said so. Your body barely managed to conceive. We can't take any chances now." I was 12 weeks along when I started noticing Carissa's patterns. She wasn't a nurse. She was a surveillance system in scrubs. She followed me to the bathroom. She stood outside the shower. She had a tablet that logged every meal, every symptom, every time I stood up or sat down. And twice, I caught her photographing the inside of my nightstand drawer when she thought I was napping. At 16 weeks, I did something I hadn't done in years. I broke a rule. Julian was at a 3-day conference in Seattle. Carissa was asleep in the guest suite, her sleeping pill routine as predictable as a metronome. I waited until 2 a.m., then I unlocked Julian's home office, the room I was discouraged from entering because work stress isn't good for the baby. His laptop was password protected, but Julian had a fatal flaw. He was predictable. He used the same 6-digit code for everything. Our wedding date. I logged into his personal email, then into the joint medical portal he'd set up with Dr. Thorne's clinic. What I found in my own medical file made my blood pressure spike so hard I could hear it in my ears. Patient. Maya Mercer. Date of service. April 14th, 2021. ***. Procedure. Exploratory laparoscopy with bilateral tubal ligation. Indication. Elective sterilization per spousal request. Patient consent waived under Medical Power of Attorney Clause. California Family Code Section 297.5. Surgeon. Dr. Eris Thorne, M.D. Anesthesia. General. Patient informed of appendectomy, pre-op. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. My hands were shaking so hard the laptop screen blurred. April 14th, 2021. I remembered that day. Julian had taken me to Thorne's clinic for what he called a routine cyst removal. I'd had abdominal pain for weeks. Pain that, in retrospect, had started exactly when Julian began adding a new, digestive supplement to my morning routine. I woke up from anesthesia with Julian holding my hand, Thorne smiling down at me, both of them saying everything went perfectly. The cyst was benign. I'd be fine in a week. They had sterilized me. Permanently. While I was unconscious. And I was 16 weeks pregnant. I closed the laptop. My hands were still trembling, but my mind had gone cold and sharp, the way it used to get in the lab when an experiment failed and I had to reverse engineer the error cascade to find the exact point where the protocol broke down. Bilateral tubal ligation. That's not a reversible procedure. It's not something your body overcomes spontaneously. The fallopian tubes are severed, cauterized, or clamped. There is no pathway for an egg to reach the uterus. There is no biological mechanism for conception. Which meant one of two things. Either I was carrying the second coming, or the baby inside me wasn't Julian's. I pulled up a second window on his laptop, searching through his personal medical folder. That's when I found the PDF scan from a clinic in Los Angeles. Century City Medical Group. Dated September 2012. 2 years before we met. Patient. Julian Marcus Mercer. DOB. 06/18/1992. ***. Procedure. Bilateral vasectomy with cauterization. Reason. Elective sterilization. Patient is unmarried, no children, age 30. Consent signed and witnessed. ***. Post-op confirmation. Sperm count 0. Patient counseled on permanence of procedure. ***. I read the date again. September 2012. He was 30 years old. Unmarried. He had himself sterilized before he ever met me. The abdominal pain I'd felt in April 2021 hadn't been a cyst. It had been deliberate. Julian had been slowly poisoning me with something, probably a low-grade irritant disguised as a digestive supplement, to create symptoms that would justify surgery. Then he'd used his medical power of attorney, a legal clause I'd signed without reading during our estate planning, to authorize a procedure I never consented to. He'd turned me into a medical experiment. A controlled variable. And now I was pregnant. I pulled up my calendar. Counted backward from my last period. 20 weeks pregnant meant conception occurred sometime in late August. I scrolled through my own memories like they were case files, looking for the data point that didn't fit Julian's narrative. August 19th. The roast incident. Julian had screamed at me for 3 consecutive hours because I'd served him a rib roast that was medium instead of medium rare. He'd thrown the plate against the wall, told me I was incompetent at the one job I had, and locked himself in his office while I cleaned Bordeaux sauce off the Venetian plaster. At 10 p.m., I'd done something I never did. I left. I took an Uber to a hotel near the airport. A generic Marriott with industrial carpet and a minibar that smelled like refrigerated sadness. I sat in the hotel bar, ordered a vodka tonic I barely touched, and struck up a conversation with a man whose name I never learned. He was in town for a conference. Software engineer. Kind eyes. He asked me if I was okay because apparently, I'd been crying without realizing it. We talked for 2 hours about nothing important. His dog, my abandoned biotech career, the strange loneliness of expensive hotel rooms. I went to his room. It was impulsive, reckless, a brief window of being someone other than Julian Mercer's broken wife. We used protection, or at least, I thought we did. Everything about that night was blurry, like watching a movie through frosted glass. I went home at 3 a.m. Julian never asked where I'd been. He apologized for overreacting about the roast and handed me a makeup gift. A pair of diamond earrings I never wore. 8 weeks later, I was pregnant. The baby kicked. A strong, defiant kick against my ribs, like it knew what I'd just figured out. Julian wasn't the father. Julian couldn't be the father. He'd been sterile for over a decade. Which meant when he found out the truth, this pregnancy wasn't going to be a miracle. It was going to be my death sentence. I had 72 hours before Julian returned from Seattle. 72 hours to become someone other than the woman who nodded and smiled and swallowed her vitamins on schedule. I needed information. I needed leverage. And I needed someone inside Julian's ecosystem who hated him as much as I was starting to. Sarah Cho had been Julian's executive assistant for 4 years. She was 31, Yale law dropout, fluent in 3 languages, and paid $68,000 a year to manage the calendar of a man who billed clients at $900 an hour. I'd met her exactly twice. Once at the Christmas party where Julian had introduced her as the help, and once when she delivered documents to our house and I'd seen the way her hand shook when Julian raised his voice over a scheduling conflict. I called her from a burner phone I'd bought at a CVS, using cash I'd slowly skimmed from grocery money over 6 months. The phone smelled like plastic packaging and desperation. "Sarah, this is Maya Mercer," I said when she answered, my voice low and steady. "I need to meet with you. Today. And I need you to not tell Julian." There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background, the hydraulic hiss of a bus brake. "Is this about the audit?" she asked finally, her voice tight. "What audit?" Another pause. Longer this time. "The SEC audit. The one Julian's been trying to bury since March." "Mrs. Mercer, if you don't know about the audit, then you need to know that your husband's firm is 6 months away from a federal investigation." We met at a coffee shop in Redwood City, 40 minutes from Atherton. Far enough that no one in Julian's circle would accidentally see us. Sarah arrived in yoga pants and a Stanford hoodie, her hair in a messy bun, looking nothing like the polished assistant who ran Julian's professional life. She had a manila folder tucked under her arm. She slid it across the table. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, investor agreements with sections highlighted in yellow. "Julian's flagship fund is a Ponzi scheme," Sarah said, her voice flat and exhausted. "Not a full-scale Madoff situation, but close. He's been using new investor capital to pay returns to old investors since 2022. The returns he brags about? Fake. The portfolio companies he claims to have exited? Most of them failed. He's been cooking the books with the help of the firm's CFO, and they've been hiding losses in shell LLCs registered in Delaware." I stared at the documents. There were emails from Julian to the CFO with subject lines like Q3 reallocation strategy and LP report adjustments. There were wire transfers moving money between accounts like a shell game. There were investor complaints that had been quietly settled with NDAs and hush money. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. Sarah looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. "Because he's going to pin it on you if the SEC comes knocking. Your name is on the LLC registrations. Mrs. Mercer. You're listed as a co-founder on 3 of the shell companies. If this goes to court, Julian's lawyers will argue you were complicit. That you knew. That you benefited. My name. On documents I'd never seen." I thought about all the times Julian had asked me to, "Just sign here. It's estate planning stuff. Don't worry about the details." "How long have you known?" I asked. "Since April. I found the files by accident when Julian asked me to pull tax documents. I've been collecting evidence since then because I knew he'd eventually try to make me the scapegoat too." I looked down at my pregnant belly, then back at Sarah. "He's been sterilizing me. Literally. He had a doctor perform surgery on me without my consent 3 years ago. And this baby I'm carrying? It's not his. When he finds out, he's going to destroy me. Legally, financially, maybe physically." Sarah's eyes widened. Then, slowly, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who just realized they'd found an ally in a war they'd been fighting alone. "Then we need to destroy him first," she said. "And I know exactly how." She pulled out her phone and opened a voice memo app. "Julian doesn't know this, but I've been recording our meetings for 6 months. Every threat, every illegal instruction, every time he's told me to forge a document or lie to an investor. I have 90 hours of audio." I looked at the folder, then at Sarah, then at the countdown clock in my head. Julian would be home in 68 hours. Dr. Thorne had scheduled my next appointment for 5 days from now. And somewhere in Julian's meticulously planned world, there was a ticking bomb he didn't know I'd discovered. "We need a lawyer," I said. "Not just any lawyer. Someone who specializes in medical malpractice and securities fraud." Sarah's smile widened. "I know someone. Her name is Rachel Lowen. She's a civil rights attorney, and her brother Marcus is the nastiest divorce lawyer in the state. They work as a team on cases like this." Dr. Lowen. The OBGYN who dropped the transducer. She hadn't just been concerned. She'd been strategically positioned. You set this up, I said slowly. You sent me to Dr. Lowen. Sarah shook her head. No. But when you told me you were pregnant, I told Dr. Lowen, my former roommate, that Julian's wife was using his family doctor. Rachel has been trying to build a case against Dr. Thorne for years. He's done this before, Mrs. Mercer. The unauthorized sterilizations. You're not his first victim. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small. Too bright. I was inside a conspiracy I didn't know existed, surrounded by people who'd been watching Julian's empire crack from the inside while I'd been counting ceiling tiles and swallowing vitamins. When can we meet with Marcus? I asked. Sarah checked her phone. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. But Mrs. Mercer, there's something you need to know. Julian scheduled something with Dr. Thorne for 2 weeks from now. It's listed in his calendar as MC Final Procedure. I don't know what that means, but... Mandatory C-section, I said, my voice hollow. He's going to force an early delivery. And when the baby comes out, he's going to demand a paternity test. And when the test proves it's not his... I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. Sarah's face told me she understood exactly what Julian would do to a wife who'd betrayed him with another man's child. The clock wasn't just ticking. It was screaming. Marcus Lowen's law office was in downtown San Francisco, on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that looked like it had been designed to make people feel small. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like a hitman wearing a Tom Ford suit, 6'3", salt and pepper hair, eyes like a surgeon evaluating exactly where to cut. Mrs. Mercer, he said, shaking my hand with a grip that was firm but not aggressive. My sister tells me your husband had you surgically sterilized without consent and is currently positioning himself to either kill your pregnancy or destroy you legally when he discovers you're carrying another man's child. Is that an accurate summary? I sat down in the leather chair across from his desk. The office smelled like expensive coffee and old law books. That's accurate. Good. I appreciate efficiency. Now, let's talk about what we're actually fighting for here. You don't just want a divorce. You want criminal charges. You want medical malpractice damages. You want to ensure that Julian Mercer spends the next decade in courtrooms and bankruptcy proceedings. Am I correct? Yes. Marcus opened a file. Inside were the documents Sarah had given me, plus about 50 more pages I hadn't seen. Bank statements. Medical records. Recorded conversations. A forensic audit of Julian's firm that looked like it had been prepared by the FBI. Here's the problem, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. Julian is smart. Morally bankrupt, but smart. He's been building a legal firewall around himself for years. The shell companies with your name on them? That's his insurance policy. If the SEC comes after him, he'll claim you were a willing participant. The medical procedures? He'll claim you consented and are now experiencing postpartum psychosis that's making you misremember events. The pregnancy? He'll say you had an affair, that you're mentally unstable, and that he's the victim of a cruel betrayal. So we can't win, I said flatly. Marcus smiled. It was the most terrifying smile I'd ever seen. I didn't say that. I said Julian is smart. But he's also arrogant. And arrogant men make predictable mistakes. We're going to use his arrogance against him. He slid a document across the desk. This is a post-nuptial agreement. I'm going to need you to let Julian force you to sign it. I stared at the pages. It was a standard post-nuptial, the kind wealthy men used to protect assets during a marriage. Except this one had been rewritten with surgical precision. Clauses about assumption of parental responsibility regardless of biological origin. Language about full legal and financial liability for any children born during the marriage. A section that required Julian to acknowledge, in writing, that he was aware of his own medical history. If I sign this, I'm giving him everything, I said. No, Marcus corrected. You're letting him think he's taking everything. But what he's actually doing is signing a confession. Look at page 7, section 4, subsection C. I flipped to the page. The language was dense, deliberately confusing, buried under paragraphs of standard legal boilerplate. But there it was. Husband acknowledges full awareness of his medical history, including but not limited to any surgical procedures affecting reproductive capacity, and accepts full legal and financial responsibility for any children born to wife during the marriage, regardless of biological parentage, in exchange for wife's relinquishment of marital assets specified in Appendix A. "He's going to sign this?" I asked. "He's going to demand you sign it. And when you resist, when you cry, when you act like the broken, desperate housewife he thinks you are, he's going to feel powerful. He's going to think he's won. And in his arrogance, he's going to sign it without reading it carefully. Because men like Julian don't believe legal language can ever be used against them." "And then?" Marcus leaned forward. His eyes locked on mine. "Then we take him to court. We present the DNA evidence showing he's not the biological father. We present his vasectomy records showing he knew he couldn't be the father. And we present this document, signed by him, accepting full legal and financial responsibility for a child he knows isn't his, which means he's either committed fraud by claiming paternity, or he's acknowledged that he performed unauthorized medical procedures on you to control your reproduction while planning to entrap you with a pregnancy he knew you couldn't have with him." The baby kicked. Hard. Like it approved of the plan. "When do we do this?" I asked. "When he's most confident. Most secure. My sister tells me Julian has a mandatory C-section, scheduled in 12 days. That means he's working to a timeline. He's going to want this post-nuptial sign before that date, to ensure legal control of the baby. So we wait. We let him make the first move." I left Marcus's office with a script memorized in my head. A performance I would have to give perfectly. I had to become the woman Julian thought I was. Fragile, dependent, defeated. So completely that he would never suspect the trap closing around him. 3 days later, Julian cornered me in our bedroom. He had a leather portfolio in his hands and that gentle, condescending smile on his face. "Maya, we need to talk about the future," he said, sitting on the edge of our bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. "I've been thinking about what's best for the baby. And for you. Given your instability during this pregnancy, I think we need to formalize some arrangements." He opened the portfolio. Inside was the post-nuptial agreement Marcus had predicted. Julian had made exactly 2 changes. He'd increased the monthly allowance I'd receive, and he'd added a clause requiring me to undergo voluntary psychiatric evaluation after birth. "I'm doing this because I love you," Julian said, his hand resting on my knee. "But I need to protect our family. You understand, right?" I let my eyes fill with tears. I let my hands shake. I played the role I'd been rehearsing for 8 years. "I'll sign it," I whispered. "I just want our family to be okay." Julian's smile widened. He handed me the pen. I signed every page. My handwriting looked shaky, uncertain, the signature of a woman who'd given up. But the document I signed wasn't Julian's version. It was the one Marcus had prepared, with his confession embedded in Section 4, subsection C. Julian never read it. He just collected the pages, slipped them back into the portfolio, and kissed my forehead like I was a child who'd finally learned to behave. "Good girl," he said. The trap was set. For the next 9 days I gave the performance of my life. I became a ghost. A fragile, barely holding together version of Maya Mercer who shuffled around our Atherton mansion in maternity pajamas and said yes to everything. Yes to the increased vitamin regimen. Yes to Carissa monitoring my sleep with a pulse oximeter. Yes to Julian's decision to postpone telling our families about the pregnancy until after the C-section, just to be safe. Yes to the nursery decorator who created a $12,000 safari-themed room I would never use. Yes to everything, while my mind ran calculations behind my eyes like code compiling. I tracked Julian's patterns with the same precision I'd once used to track cell cultures in the lab. He woke at 5:30 a.m. First action. Check his phone for market opens. Second action. Shower for exactly 11 minutes. Third action. Protein shake, 42 degrees, delivered by me with a trembling hand and a vacant smile. I catalogued his cruelty. The way he'd review Carissa's monitoring reports each evening, highlighting moments where my heart rate had elevated, asking me in that soft, dangerous voice what I'd been anxious about. The way he'd hold my face in his hands and tell me I was doing so well considering. The way he'd casually mentioned, twice, that postpartum psychosis was common in unstable women, and wasn't it good that we'd already arranged for psychiatric evaluation? He was building the narrative. Preparing the stage for the moment when he'd discover the baby wasn't his and I'd conveniently be diagnosed as mentally incompetent. On day 4 of my performance, Julian's mistress showed up. Her name was Vanessa Chen. 28. Junior partner at Julian's firm. She arrived with a rolling suitcase and the kind of confidence that comes from sleeping with someone else's husband while pretending it's a business mentorship. Julian introduced her as a temporary house guest who needed to stay with us while her apartment was being renovated. "Maya, you don't mind, do you?" Julian asked, his hand on the small of Vanessa's back, his eyes daring me to object. "Vanessa's working on the Sanderson deal. It'll be easier if she's here." "Of course," I said, my voice small and accommodating. "I'll make up the guest room." "Actually," Julian said, smiling, "she'll take the master suite guest wing. You know, the one with the view. It's much nicer." I watched Vanessa move her things into the room adjacent to ours, the room that shared a wall with our bedroom. I listened to them laugh over wine that night while I sat in the nursery, one hand on my belly, counting the days until Julian's carefully constructed world would collapse. On day 6, Julian found something he wasn't supposed to find. I'd left my burner phone in the pocket of a jacket hanging in the mudroom. Carissa had taken the jacket to be dry cleaned. The phone had fallen out. Julian had been there when it hit the floor. I came downstairs to find him standing in the kitchen, the phone in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. "Maya," he said quietly, and the temperature in the room dropped 15 degrees. "Whose phone is this?" I'd prepared for this moment. Marcus had coached me through it. The key was to act confused, not defensive. To seem like the fragile pregnancy-brained wife who couldn't possibly be plotting anything. I don't know," I stammered, my hand going to my throat in a gesture of feminine helplessness I'd seen in 100 movies. "Maybe it's Carissa's? Or the decorators?" Julian turned the phone over in his hands. It was locked. Password protected. He looked at me with eyes that were calculating the probability that I was lying. "It was in your jacket pocket, Maya." "I don't remember," I said and let tears spill down my cheeks. Real tears, because the fear was real even if the confusion was performance. "Julian, I can barely remember what I ate for breakfast. The hormones. Dr. Thorne said my memory would be affected. I'm so sorry. I don't know whose phone that is." He stared at me for a long time. Then he pocketed the phone. "I'll figure it out," he said. That night, I heard him on a call with Dr. Thorne, discussing moving the C-section up by 4 days. The mandatory delivery was now scheduled for 72 hours from that moment. The clock had just accelerated. And I was either going to escape this marriage, or I was going to die trying. The San Mateo County Family Court building smelled like floor polish and broken marriages. Julian arrived with 6 lawyers. 6. They moved in formation like a corporate special forces unit, carrying leather briefcases and iPads and the absolute certainty that they were about to dismantle a mentally unstable housewife who'd made the mistake of challenging a venture capital titan. Julian wore a navy suit that probably cost $8,000. He looked calm, composed, almost bored. Like this hearing was a minor inconvenience between his morning run and his afternoon earnings call. He shook Marcus Lowen's hand with a condescending smile. "Let's make this quick, Marcus," Julian said, loud enough for everyone in the hallway to hear. "My wife is 28 weeks pregnant. She needs rest, not courtroom drama. I'm hoping we can settle this amicably." I sat next to Marcus, wearing a maternity dress I'd bought at Target, my hair in a simple ponytail, no jewelry except my wedding ring. I looked exactly like what Julian wanted me to be. Small, defeated, dependent. Judge Catherine Halloway's chambers were smaller than I'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, a desk piled with case files, windows that looked out over the courthouse parking lot. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, with reading glasses perched on her nose and the expression of someone who'd seen every flavor of human cruelty and was no longer impressed by expensive suits. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Halloway said, reviewing the postnuptial agreement Julian had filed. "You're petitioning for full custody of the unborn child, claiming your wife is mentally unfit for parenting. You're also requesting that Mrs. Mercer relinquish all marital assets except for a monthly allowance of $5,000 and residence in your guest property. Is that correct?" "Regrettably, yes, Your Honor," Julian said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "My wife has been experiencing severe pregnancy-related psychiatric disturbance. Our family physician, Dr. Eris Thorne, has documented instances of paranoia, memory loss, and delusional thinking. I want what's best for both Maya and our child." This arrangement ensures she'll be cared for while I assume primary parental responsibility. Judge Holloway looked at me. Mrs. Mercer, do you contest this petition? I do, Your Honor, I said quietly. On what grounds? Marcus stood. Your Honor, we'd like to submit what we're calling the addendum of biological and criminal fact, before any final determinations are made. Julian's lead attorney, a man named Richard who looked like he'd been born wearing a tie, objected immediately. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We were not provided with. You were provided with notice that additional evidence would be submitted, Marcus interrupted smoothly. California Family Code Section 217 allows for good cause exceptions when fraud or coercion is alleged. We're alleging both. Judge Holloway leaned back. I'll allow it. Proceed. Marcus opened his briefcase. The first document he placed on the judge's desk was a DNA analysis report. The second was a medical record from Century City Medical Group dated September 2012. The third was a surgical consent form from April 2021 with my signature forged on it. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice level and precise. Mr. Mercer is petitioning for full custody of a child that is biologically impossible for him to have fathered. On September 14, 2012, Mr. Mercer underwent a voluntary bilateral vasectomy with cauterization. His post-operative sperm count was 0. He has been surgically sterile for over 12 years. The color drained from Julian's face. I watched it happen in real time. The way his skin went from tan to gray, the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Furthermore, Marcus continued, in April of 2021, Mr. Mercer authorized Dr. Eris Thorne to perform a non-consensual bilateral tubal ligation on Mrs. Mercer during what she was told was a routine cyst removal. Mrs. Mercer was surgically sterilized without her knowledge or consent, making her current pregnancy medically impossible through any scenario involving Mr. Mercer as the biological father. Judge Holloway picked up the documents, her reading glasses sliding down her nose as she scanned the pages. Mr. Mercer, she said slowly, you're asking this court to award you custody of a child you cannot possibly have fathered, while simultaneously claiming your wife is mentally unstable. And according to these records, you did this after secretly sterilizing both yourself and your wife. Do I have that right? Julian stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. This is a lie. She had an affair. She's trying to. Sit down. Judge Holloway's voice could have cut steel. Julian sat. Marcus pulled out the postnuptial agreement. The one Julian had signed 9 days ago. Your Honor, page 7, section 4, subsection C. Mr. Mercer signed a document accepting full legal and financial responsibility for any children born to wife during the marriage, regardless of biological parentage. He did this with full knowledge of his own medical history. I didn't know she'd cheated. Julian shouted, his composure completely shattered. I thought. You thought what, Mr. Mercer? Judge Holloway asked, her voice dangerously quiet. You thought that you could sterilize your wife without her consent, then trap her into signing away her assets when she miraculously became pregnant? Or did you simply assume that a woman you'd surgically sterilized could never possibly have a child, and therefore you'd never be caught in your fraud? The silence in that room was absolute. Mrs. Mercer, the judge said, turning to me. Do you have anything you'd like to add? I stood. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. Your Honor, I have medical records showing Dr. Thorne has performed at least 4 other unauthorized sterilizations on women whose husbands wanted to control their reproductive capacity. I have audio recordings of my husband instructing his CFO to commit securities fraud. I have documentation showing Mr. Mercer used my identity to create shell companies that are currently under SEC investigation. And I have bank records showing he's been siphoning marital assets into offshore accounts for the past 3 years. I pulled out the final folder. The one Sarah had compiled. My husband didn't just steal my fertility, Your Honor. He stole my identity, my financial security, and 8 years of my life. And he did it all while making me believe I was broken. Judge Holloway removed her glasses. Mr. Mercer, I'm denying your petition in its entirety. I'm also ordering an immediate criminal referral to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of assault, battery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit medical malpractice. You are to have no contact with Mrs. Mercer except through legal counsel. And I'm issuing a freeze on all marital assets pending a full forensic audit. She looked at Julian with something close to disgust. You wanted everything, Mr. Mercer. Congratulations. You got it. Now you get to answer for it. Julian walked out of that courtroom surrounded by lawyers who were already calculating how much his defense would cost. I walked out into the hallway where Dr. Rachel Lowen was waiting, her medical bag in hand. How are you feeling? She asked, checking my blood pressure right there in the corridor. Like I can finally breathe, I said. The baby kicked. Strong. Alive. Mine. 6 months later, I'm standing in a kitchen with sage green cabinets and marble countertops that I chose myself. The house is in Menlo Park, 3 bedrooms, nothing ostentatious, with a backyard where I've planted tomatoes and basil and a small herb garden that smells like freedom when I water it in the mornings. The baby, my daughter, Elena, is sleeping in a bassinet next to me, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. She has dark hair and brown eyes and absolutely nothing of Julian in her features, which is appropriate since Julian is currently in federal prison awaiting trial for securities fraud, conspiracy to commit medical malpractice, and assault. Dr. Thorne lost his medical license. The California Medical Board revoked it after discovering he'd performed unauthorized sterilizations on 7 women over a 15-year period, all at the request of controlling husbands who'd paid him under the table. 3 other women have come forward. We're building a class action lawsuit. Julian's venture capital firm collapsed in spectacular fashion. The SEC froze everything. The Ponzi scheme was bigger than Sarah had realized. Over $200 million in fabricated returns. Investors are suing. The firm's CFO took a plea deal and testified against Julian in exchange for a reduced sentence. I got $12 million in the medical battery settlement. Not because I needed Julian's money, but because I wanted him to watch every dollar get transferred into an account with my maiden name on it. Maya Chen. The name I should have kept 8 years ago. I used part of it to start a consulting firm. Biotech companies hire me to evaluate research protocols and identify methodological fraud. Turns out, 8 years of living with a pathological liar gave me an excellent education in how to spot deception. The rest I invested in a legal fund for women escaping coercive marriages. It's called the Broken Dolls Project, and we've helped 19 women so far. Julian writes me letters from prison. They arrive once a month, always on expensive stationery, always full of apologies and explanations and thinly veiled threats about appeals and retrials. I don't read them. I use them as fire starters for my backyard fire pit. This morning, my doorbell camera caught him, or rather, his lawyer, being served papers for the civil suit. I watched it on my phone while feeding Elena, and I laughed. Actually laughed. A sound I'd forgotten I could make. Sarah Cho is now my business partner. We work from adjacent home offices, managing our client list and occasionally taking coffee breaks to marvel at how our lives transformed the moment we decided to stop being accomplices to our own erasure. The man from the hotel, Elena's biological father, reached out through Marcus's office last month. A software engineer from Portland who'd seen the news coverage and put the timeline together. We met for coffee. His name is David. He's kind, careful, and completely uninterested in disrupting Elena's life. But he'd like to be part of it, if I'm open to that. I told him I'd think about it. Because I'm allowed to think now. I'm allowed to make decisions at my own pace, in my own time. Elena wakes up, her small mouth opening in a yawn. I pick her up, breathing in that newborn smell that somehow contains entire universes. You want to know something? I whisper to her. Your existence is biologically impossible. According to every medical record, every surgical note, every plan your biological father's husband made, you shouldn't exist. She blinks at me with dark, serious eyes. But here you are anyway, I say. The most perfect variable in an equation that was supposed to have no solution. Outside, my sage green kitchen catches the morning light. Inside, my daughter grasps my finger with surprising strength. Julian wanted a trophy that couldn't grow, couldn't leave, couldn't ever have a claim to anything he'd built. But before I show you the final photo of what Julian looked like when the sheriff arrived at his office, I have to ask you something. If you've ever felt like a trophy on someone else's shelf, if you've ever been made to feel small or broken, or like your only value was what you could do for someone else, then you belong here with us. We aren't just a channel. We are a community of survivors who know that the longest game always ends in justice. Hit that subscribe button right now. Don't let this be the last story you hear. Join us, and show the world that you aren't just a character in someone else's script. You are the author of your own. And if you're ready for your own new beginning, comment, "I am free" below. I read every single one, and I want to celebrate with you. Now, back to the end of the man who thought he owned the world. Julian wanted a trophy that couldn't grow, couldn't leave, couldn't ever have a claim to anything he'd built. He wanted a version of me that was frozen in amber, beautiful and silent. Instead, he got a truth he couldn't afford. And I got a life he could never take away. The best revenge isn't watching your enemy fall. It's building something so beautiful from the wreckage that they can see it from their cage.